Hello everyone, my name is Jake Johnstone and welcome to the Grit with Wisdom podcast. This is the podcast that aims to delve deep into the inner psyche and the mindsets of mountain bikers from all aspects of our sport in order to help you understand some of the tools, the tactics, and what it takes to push the boundaries of our sport from a mental and emotional perspective. Today on the show, I'm super excited to be sharing a wide-ranging conversation with Nic Zilinski. Nic is better known as Van Can on the socials these days, and he lives in Vancouver and spends most of his time shredding the North Shore, Squamish, Whistler, and more. I met Nic at the bike park a couple of years back, and he's not only an all-round good guy, but he's also an incredible rider who is widely known for producing some of the best mountain biking videos, trail reviews, how-to tips, and bike product reviews out there. No small feat with the sea of mountain biking YouTubers out there these days. So I've really enjoyed following Nic over the years and watching both his writing and content making progress at an impressive pace. So take a listen as we deep dive into the mindset behind that progression and some of the stories behind the Van Can channel. Enjoy. Nic, welcome to the show, man. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, sweet to be here.
Fantastic. How you doing today? Have you been up to much?
No,
No,
not really. It's we're in between semesters at the university, so things start to somewhat slow down. So they get really busy towards the end with exams, like grading stuff for students, and then it all just stops for about a week or two, and then you start getting everything ready for the next semester. And so we're in a bit of a lull, but which is nice to take a bit of a break. And yeah, and then riding seasons is kind of starting here. So I've been trying to ride a lot, and then yeah, I feel like I've ridden a lot, and that's like tired me out just between getting out and riding like so much all of a sudden, and then trying to do some more filming and editing all at the same time. May have tried to do a little bit too much at once.
Man, I could totally relate. It's kind of hard adjusting back to that summer pace here, isn't it? Where we just go all the time. Now, you just got back from a riding trip, is that right?
Yes, I went to Coast Gravity last weekend. So they just opened like 2 weeks ago, I think. And they're, if people aren't familiar, they're on the Sunshine Coast, which is, I think it's pronounced Shelt, BC. And it's a small bike park. It's only about 200 meters of elevation, and you don't take a lift. You take a truck, like a shuttle truck, and it's known for being like a flowy jump kind of mountain bike park. And no, it's super fun, and it was super busy, of course, and it's a little slow going sometimes with just the trucks. But no, it's great to be at a park again. And then we got Whistler coming up soon too, so that'll be sweet.
Yeah, man, that looked like a great time. And I know, like, I've been out there in the past, not this season yet, but those berms, they're manicured, aren't they? They're some of the
Yeah,
probably the best berms in BC, I think.
it is crazy right now. They had just redone sort of the main jump pro line trail called Coastal Cruise, and it's just like perfectly shaped right now. It's like, it's kind of crazy to look at. You feel bad, kind of like, doing anything to it because it's like so perfectly cut right now.
Oh, man, that's so good.
Yeah, yeah,
I
it's
look
sweet.
forward to the videos of that one. For those that aren't familiar with you and you're writing from YouTube and the socials, can you tell us a little bit about like who you are and what you're into doing?
Yeah, I guess like in general, I just make mountain bike videos mostly about me and my friends going out and riding is like most of it, and then just trying to make like an entertaining video about whatever we get up to. And then every now and then I'll do maybe some how-to or technical stuff or talk about bikes, something I find interesting. Yeah, and that's what I do on YouTube. And yeah, pretty general. I don't have like a super tight focus on what I do. I just kind of do like, oh, that's interesting for mountain bikes, but mostly riding, because that is like what I'm mostly interested in, is just getting out for rides.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And I do love that about your channel. Kind of there's lots of different focuses on there and it keeps it interesting. That's cool. Mountain bikes in general, love to ask, like, what makes you passionate about biking and like, why do you ride mountain bikes?
So I started mountain biking almost 5 years ago now. so I moved to Vancouver to go to grad school, and before that, I just rode BMX. Winnipeg is quite flat, which is where I lived. I went to did my undergrad there, and I lived in Winnipeg for 10 years. So rode a lot of BMX, and when I came here to go to grad school, my friend was like, "Oh, you should get a mountain bike because, like, yeah, like mountain biking is the best out there. So you should at least try it." And I did, and it was nice. I think the first thing that really got me, uh, I got into kind of a point in BMX where I think everyone kind of you're always improving, and then you kind of get to a point where maybe the next level of skills just starts to get like really hard and or really dangerous, and 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 so I kind of had plateaued when I was riding BMX, and mostly just getting out for fun, not trying to like go too crazy, and then to come over to mountain biking, something similar where the skills transferred over, but it was kind of like a whole new world. Like I didn't ride with brakes on my BMX, and I still don't. But
Huh.
so I have no braking intuition. I probably still don't, but I mean, I didn't at the time. And so yeah, just like getting on the mountain bike, and then I like being out in the woods, and it was kind of cool to do like a new thing, but not totally from the beginning. And then you start meeting your friends, and everyone's kind of into it, and it's just a whole like all those things kind of come together. Like you know, the trails are insane. The bikes are really cool. There's like a whole bunch of new stuff to learn. Everyone's crazy how many people are into it, and that's like it's nice. Winnipeg had a pretty big BMX scene, and so it's really nice. Being with a good crew of people who are really into the same sort of hobby, and uh, but even then, as people were getting older, it was harder to get everyone out and ride and stuff. Um, but mountain biking here is so popular, like across all ages, really. And uh, I went from being like the person who was kind of the most into bikes where I was to coming here and being just like maybe just an average level of interest. There's people who are just way more into bikes than me, which is awesome. And yeah, all those things kind of come together, and just yeah, just was super fun, really.
Dude, it's super cool hearing about your BMX background there and then kind of how that's transferred over into like this deep passion for mountain biking here in
Mm-hmm.
BC. So many kind of questions come out of that for me, but kind of an interesting topic I picked up there. You spoke about kind of getting to that plateau on your BMX where, pushing yourself more to maybe learn some new tricks or to go even harder was just more risk than you were willing to take on.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to a lot of people that experience kind of that similar issue or that similar problem in their mountain biking. They feel like they're just, riding the same trails all of the time. They want to do a little bit more, but they're not quite sure if they're ready to take on that risk or push themselves. I'm curious, have you reached that point in mountain biking, or have you managed to avoid that?
Yeah, I still feel like I've got a lot to learn on the mountain bike. And what's a little bit different for mountain biking, um, BMX was very, uh, when you're going to learn a trick, it's like specifically that, like that it's so well defined of like you went to the skate park and you did something really specific, like you did a bar spin, like you learned something. But in mountain biking, you're always like, at the same it's good and bad, but sometimes you're kind of like am I getting better, like because you're always just trying to get better at like braking a little bit better or like cornering a little bit better. And so it's good in that you're always doing the same thing, like always the same skills. And but then also it's a little bit harder to tell sometimes like what metric you want to judge yourself on for, like am I getting better. um so as far as like, yeah, I feel like I still have a lot to learn, especially I feel like I learned to jump, on the BMX, and that transferred over really well. But then my technical riding was like non-existent, and so I still have tons of like I'm still can be pretty awkward going across technical stuff. And my friends who grew up mountain biking, I know it's just the way they ride smoother, just that intuition they've developed from riding for an extra 10 years. Um, I still have a lot to learn there. And yeah, I do find one thing, because there's so much riding here. There's there's always a new feature, and I can get sort of that same sort of you could do a feature that is like the same level of difficulty, but it just is new, and that seems to be good enough for me. Like, if you hit a 10-foot drop in one place and you get used to that and you figure it out, and then you just build like a different 10-foot drop somewhere else that's a little different, like maybe the entrance is a little different or whatever, and then you do that one, that like success, like doing that, yeah, still keeps me going. Still is like really sweet feeling to like do something new. And there's so much writing here, just is like never ending. So it's kind of one of those like, yeah, I so far I just haven't felt that feeling because there's just always some new thing to ride, and whether or not it doesn't even need to be harder, just being new kind of still gets you that cool like progression feeling.
I totally hear you, man. That's a great answer. And I love that point, with mountain biking, we're not bound to, just the same quarter pipe and trying to do different tricks constantly on that same
Mm-hmm.
quarter pipe or that same skate park. We've got just this wealth of new trails and there's always new features kind of being created or being made. So keeps it super interesting. Goes kind of hand in hand now for you, but I'd love if you could speak a little bit what your journey into YouTube has been like and how that has developed and grown into, what that is today.
So I've always made videos. Even before I rode BMX, I had gotten a mountain bike, and my friends and I just like rode around on the street. Most like we rode street on our mountain bikes, just jumping off curbs and stuff, and finding bigger curbs to jump off. And we would make like edits and stuff, and I would burn them. Like I'd make like an edit and burn it into a DVD, and like bring the DVD player around to like show people.
Nice.
And then from there, as I got into BMX, obviously making edits is kind of like that's almost part of the culture there. Like less so, somewhat contest, but much more sort of the thing to do is to make like over the summer you kind of collect the clips or whatever, and you make your edit, uh, and so we were always doing that, and so making videos was always still kind of like kicking along in the BMX world. And then when I came to Vancouver, I didn't know anything about mountain biking, so I went onto YouTube and I was looking up trails just to see because I was really nervous. Like the stuff that scared me, like pretty much everything scared me about riding a trail when I first started, and so I really wanted to see beforehand like what I was getting into, and that's where I saw. I want to say like Eric from BCPOV was kind of the first person I saw where you could actually watch like a whole trail and you could actually like get a feel for it, and like Brian from BKXC. And I saw that, and with them I'd used a GoPro before, and like everyone, it's like unwatchable. Basically, you can
Yeah.
kind of like see stuff. And you're like, okay, that was kind of interesting. But their videos were just so nice, and yeah, something about that I really liked. Because we were making videos and stuff for BMX. You were always trying to make like a really good looking video, and I was also working as a photographer at a time, so I was into cameras and like aesthetically pleasing video, and I really liked that. And and so that's what got me into YouTube in the first place, was like, oh, I'm just gonna try to make good looking videos like these guys are. And then once I started doing that, people seemed interested in it, and like the channel kind of grew a little bit, and just step by step it was like, oh, people want to see more, so I was making more videos. And then eventually you get to a point where you can monetize your YouTube channel. And it was like, oh, if I can make a bit more, if I can make money off the YouTube channel, then I can kind of put more focus into it and spend more money buying cameras, more GoPros, and kind of ignore some other stuff, other work, uh, in favor of the YouTube channel. And yeah, it just kind of kept growing from there. And now it's sort of, yeah, it is what you see today.
No, that's awesome. It's super cool hearing how that's kind of just grown from, pure passion, just filming BMX because that's what you like doing.
Hmm.
And then kind of taking that here to Vancouver and realizing that you can actually make it into, the great big channel it is today. Um, Awesome to hear. That was kind of an amazing moment, wasn't it, when the GoPro footage stopped, looking like it was filmed on a potato and actually became like really enjoyable to watch. To the point today where, I can watch one of your videos and I can see every rock that's on the trail and I can actually pick out the line before I go and ride it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is crazy. Like, so yeah, I think it really was Brian from BKXC um, oh no, his name's reading in my mind too. Nate Hills, and Nate Hales was doing like Follow Cam Friday. I want to say that he was the first one to like chest mount the gimbal and like go film trails. And yeah, it's crazy, that I think it was a video in Moab or something that Brian saw. And it's like that video sort of like, that's like, if you can go back in time, like that's the point. Like that was the tipping point of like, Brian saw that video and Brian started doing videos and everyone saw Brian doing this vlog sort of thing. And it just like kind of caught all from there. Yeah, it's kind of, there's like, it's crazy. You can kind of look back into a single point of like, oh, GoPros looked better at this point, and then just mountain biking on YouTube just exploded from that.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Super cool looking back on that. And I'm curious, I know you've done a couple of videos on this already, but can you speak a little bit about the camera gear and the setup you're using these days to film your videos?
So I started with the GoPro. The very first one I got, it was the GoPro Hero 5, and I had the Karma gimbal from GoPro, and that was what I first started with. And I was chest mounting it, like a lot of people were. And then finally GoPro got to a place around the Hero 8 where the stabilization was like pretty good. It was quite good, and you could get away with mounting it other places. And so what we do now, instead of using the gimbal, is we'll wear full faces and then we'll mount it on the bottom of our chin bar of the full face. And then your head kind of acts a bit like a gimbal, and then the stabilization is good enough that it's still very watchable. And I like that a lot too, is because when you look around and you're talking to someone, like the camera, turns to them as well. Whereas the gimbal is always just facing the same way.
That's about as real as point of view gets here.
Yeah, and it's very simple now, and it's very accessible as well. Like when I first started, I saw these videos and I had no idea. I was like, how is it so smooth? Like it was so confusing. But now GoPros have gotten really good to the point where like the colors are way better than they used to be. You don't really need to color grade it anymore. And the stabilization is really, really good, where really, like, honestly, you could probably, for most people, you could probably just chest mount it like they recommend. And like that looks pretty good now. And then if you want to go a little more advanced like we do, we just get little mounts or whatever and put it on the chin bar. And that's it. There's nothing too crazy to it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, with the chin bar, are you getting like the custom 3D printed little clips that go onto your helmet? Is that how you're doing it?
Yeah, I've got the 3D printed one from, what's his name? Pro Bike 3D on Etsy, I think his name is. And
Yeah, I seen him on Instagram the other day.
yeah. So Joe from Trail Features also sent me another mount to print out, which I need to try too, for my helmet. I can't remember if he made it or he had modified it. But yeah, so I've got to go print out another bit of a wider one to put on I have a Troy Lee stage. But you can pretty much, he makes the Pro Bike 3D guy makes them for a ton of different helmets. And even if there isn't one, what I did before, what some of my other friends do, is just take zip ties and like GoPro mounts and just start shoving them against it and see like what fits. Eventually you'll find something that sticks to it, like depending on the shape. And yeah, you can make it work even without, going too crazy.
No, it's super cool, not only how good the camera technology's got, but that we have access to things like 3D printers these days, and that we can make custom mounts as well, relatively easily and relatively cheaply. We're super lucky there.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing I wanted to mention as well, I know you've got a handy trick for minimizing wind noise as you're filming with your GoPro. Can you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, that actually, I do get questions about that a lot. So I think the easiest, okay, so what I do is I just buy a wind cover from Amazon. They're called a dead cat. I like the ones that they look like fur. It's like a fake fur. Those ones work the best as opposed to foam. And they're really cheap. You buy them for some road mic or whatever. And then I also buy double-sided tape. And then I just cut up the dead cat and then use the double-sided tape to sort of make like a circle around the mic, and I stick it on top there. Now, an easier way that I saw than that, even, I think Skills with Phil, he cuts the dead cat and then he just does a super glue circle and sticks it on top.
Nice.
And so you're not even like bothering with the double-sided tape. A little bit riskier because you really don't want to get the super glue into the mic, because then like the mic will be destroyed. But yeah, it helps a ton. because then you go into the GoPro and you turn off any sort of wind filter. You just say, stereo only, it says, and then it won't turn on the digital wind filter, which is what sounds like that underwater kind of sound sometimes you hear. And it makes a huge difference. You can actually like hear everything without just a crazy amount of wind noise. So
There we
yeah.
go. Good pro tip right there for anyone out there filming some mountain biking on their GoPro. That's awesome. And I know, from watching your channel, you're posting all the time. You're posting quite often. That must, take an incredible amount of time and then work behind the scenes there. How often are you posting these days?
So I tried to post a video once a week,
Wow.
and then I do like to post to Instagram still. That's still sort of the Instagram doesn't, it's not monetized in any way. It just is like interesting clips or whatever or photos that I like. And I have no plan for that one, but I do post on Instagram a couple times a week.
Is it different stuff than YouTube, or is it shorter clips of what you're posting on YouTube?
It's mostly different stuff. A lot of times it just is like phone clips from when we're out riding. Especially if I'm not out filming the ride or whatever, I still might film like a couple clips for Instagram, just like trying to jump something or whatnot. Uh, Still sort of the same sort of BMX mentality that I had before, like very like yeah, when we would go out and ride, yeah, you would always just film like random little like clips or whatever you thought were cool, and yeah, there's something fun about just sharing like yeah, jumping something or doing something interesting or
Yeah, man, absolutely. I think it's inspiring too, from the outside, is seeing other people having good times. It makes you want to go get on your bike and do the same.
oh totally, that's yeah, it just is like I see other people do it and it makes me want to do it, and then hopefully what I do makes other people want to do it, and it just yeah, we just keep going.
For sure, dude. You hinted a little bit at the start, but I'm curious. Like, this is a lot of work posting, to YouTube at least once a week, and then Instagram a couple of times a week. Like, how do you balance this with your university studies and maybe work as well?
So the nice thing about the university is um it's I set my own schedule basically, and so I can move things around, and it really comes down just to efficiency. So when I had a 9 to 5 job, the problem with that was, it was Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and you had to be there 9 to 5. And a lot of times you're waiting for someone, or like you're always waiting for something else to get done, and you can't really go anywhere. And it's just like there's a lot of inefficiency there, and that's just unfortunately how it works. You get into a big corporation or whatever it is. But with the university, where I'm really just doing it for myself, more or less, or I might be. So there's my research that I work on, which I can, for the most part, do whenever I want.
Yes.
I just have, I'm trying to get it done, and then I'll work as a teaching assistant, and I might have scheduled lab times to be in there with the students, but usually only 2 or 3 hours a week, and then I'll do marking, which again, whether I mark it at 9 at night or get up and do it in the morning, doesn't really matter. I just need to get it done, and it's actually the flexibility that really helps, where it's like I can get up and I can just shove everything into like 1 hour blocks, or I can do multiple things at once. Sometimes, like if I'm in the lab with students, sometimes maybe I have to be at the lab with students, but they don't really need that much help during the lab. So I might sit and mark while they're doing their thing, and if they need my help, I'll go help them. So it's nice to like put two. I can do two things at once, and then it's nice with the YouTube. It's sort of the same thing again. I can just sit on the couch, and then some of the stuff I don't need to think about too much, just like importing the clips or moving things around. Maybe I'll do that while my girlfriend and I are watching TV. And yeah, I'm just always like kind of doing maybe like two or three things at once and moving things around to fit. And yeah, the university helps because I don't need to be anywhere specifically for any specific time chunk, and allows me to kind of get more done probably.
Yeah, that's cool, man. It's cool hearing how you make all that work. I'm curious to know if you have any tips for people out there, capturing some footage and then trying to edit it all down. Because I know a common theme I've noticed and a theme I had, when I was filming some stuff on a GoPro years ago now, is you'd go out, you'd have a good day, you'd film all this stuff, then all of a sudden you'd go home and be like, oh man, I've got like 5 hours of GoPro clips to go through here. So it's going to take me a long time and I might end up with like 30 seconds of good footage. Like, do you have any tips for, being efficient at editing footage?
Yeah, yeah. So you know, uh, so what I do is just that I try to be really efficient and say, as opposed to, so my friends, Dale and Dave, they also run YouTube channels and they take a very different approach of they're always filming all the time. And so they have a ton of footage, and they're capturing everything, which is really good in that they end up getting like sometimes random stuff will happen or we'll go for rides and end up being like really amazing for just a really random reason. And then they'll have that and they'll be like, oh, that can be a video. Um, but then of course now they've got like hours and hours and hours of footage.
Man.
And they've got to like remember where everything is. Where my approach now is I try to plan ahead of time. Um, I will think of something that's interesting, or I'll know of something interesting that I want to do, and I will go like, okay, well, maybe Whistler opened the new Dirt Merchant. And I'm like, well, I want to go ride it, and I think like me riding it and looking over it and seeing the new trail will be interesting. So I'll go to Whistler specifically with that in mind. And when I'm filming, I'll do the same thing. Like I won't film unless like I know that I need this shot for some reason. Um, and that way, when I get home, it's all just basically like I'll have more footage than I need, but I really just need to cut it down a little bit. And I think Casey Neistat, when he was doing his daily vlogs, he said something like, he's like, yeah, I'm making a 10-minute vlog and I've got 11 minutes of footage. So like that's how he was doing it every day, because it just takes so long to go back through the footage.
Hmm.
And I find it's really hard. The two things I find really hard are what you said, where if you have tons of footage, like hours and hours to go back through it, it just takes way too long. That, and if the footage starts to get too old, I kind of forget like what was interesting about it. Um, and I will tend to put things off. If there is tons of footage, I'll be like, I'll get to it eventually. And then the other thing happens where then it gets old too. And so I've got tons of old footage where I got to think like, okay, what was interesting about that day? Like, when did this thing happen? And you almost have to rewatch a lot of it and be like, oh, okay, like this happened. So I try to avoid all that. I try to plan ahead of time. And like when I go to film a video, usually I know ahead of time, like I'm going to go try this thing and I'm going to film a video about it. And that's the plan.
Totally, I love that approach. And are you kind of going straight home then and doing the edit afterwards or doing it like the next day?
Yeah. Sometimes it depends. I try to do it within a week for sure.
Okay, yeah.
Usually, yeah. So when a lot of people ask me like for stuff I have planned out like way in advance, but really I was filming a video and then putting it out the next week. Like the video you were seeing was like very, very recent. And so I always had trouble answering when people are like, oh, like what video, are you going to be doing in 2 or 3 months? And it's like, well, I don't know. I basically, yeah, I try to get home. I'll take the footage off my camera so I don't forget and like accidentally delete it or something. So I'll just put it from the GoPro right onto the computer. And then I try to edit it usually within the week, just so it's all, I can remember everything. And then usually I'm pretty excited to see it too. Usually I might have done something where I'm like, oh, I think that'll look cool on the camera and I want to see it. So I'll at least like maybe import it and kind of take a look and then go from there. So yeah, I try to do it pretty
Yeah,
quick.
man. That's super cool. And I know from a viewer's perspective too, I like that because I'm able to see, when Whistler opens, I'm able to see you go and ride Whistler within a week. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not like I'm watching, opening day of Whistler in September or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more relevant. I like that approach. Shifting gears a little bit here, I'd love to kind of dig into, some of the mindset stuff behind your riding. I'm really curious, you're doing lots of rides there for more of like a work purpose or more of like a YouTube filming purpose. And then I'm sure you're doing some rides on the side as well that are just for fun without the
Mhm.
camera out. So I'm curious, does your comfort level differ for riding a trail, just for fun? You're just riding with your buddies or by yourself versus when you're filming with an intention in mind?
Yeah, I would say there's and this would happen when you're BMXing as well. You get like camera courage, we would call it.
like that.
And so
Never heard
like
that term, but that's a funny one.
yeah, you kind of um when you're out, say when we were out BMXing and we're out to get a clip and everyone's there, we got the camera and stuff, and it's something you've been scared to do, you kind of go like, well, everyone's here. If I'm going to try it, like now would be the time. And you know, it would be ideal for me to try it and do it now with the camera out, as opposed to coming back later and things aren't set up and doing it by myself. And so there is kind of like that little bit of boost of like, you're probably not going to get better in the next like 2 or 3 days. So like if either you're probably going to do it now or like you need more time to practice and prepare. So there is like that little bit of like, if you're kind of on the edge of something of like, should you try it? Yeah, totally. When the camera's out, I will kind of like just a little bit though. It's stuff that where it's I know I can do it, but maybe it's just a little scary. I almost never just like YOLO it into anything that I wouldn't normally ever consider or something like that.
Yeah, man, that totally doesn't surprise me because it seems like you're always riding. And I guess if you were, YOLOing it into features and, just turning the brain off and riding, you would probably be, out with a broken arm at least, at least some of the season there. So it's cool to hear you've got that approach. And I'm sure it helps a lot, having friends around and having, that extra boost of confidence sometimes, just to help you, push past some of those mental barriers and ride these things that you are capable of riding skill wise. But I'm curious, has that ever come back to bite you?
Mm, uh, no, but I'm a pretty cautious rider. Like, um, I I definitely dial it back quite a bit. I think maybe from where I could be riding and like kind of maybe falling a bit more. And I think because of that, yeah, I really haven't done anything too regrettable. And I think, my channel isn't super focused on me sort of like sending anything too crazy or like, say when I watch like say Seminux Next Edit, I'm kind of expecting him to like do something pretty crazy.
Absolutely.
And he's got that to deal with sort of like I'm sure mentally for him, he has to always be like, okay, like I'm that guy who does like the craziest thing. Which is probably super stressful.
Must be a lot of pressure, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously I really like it. Like, I love watching his videos. But I guess luckily for me, uh, sort of my channel and what I do hasn't focused too much around, you know, uh, being the best rider or doing like the craziest thing. Now we do try to like push ourselves and stuff, and we'll try to like record our process maybe for like writing something new. But it's always someone's almost certainly is done it before, like we know it's rideable. It might be like really technical or hard, but it's nothing, yeah, nothing usually too crazy. And so yeah, no, I haven't gotten into too many bad situations that way,
Oh
or
man,
any
that's
really. Yeah.
yeah, that's certainly good to hear. And personally, I think it's great having people like yourself there on YouTube. I find it, like you said, it's really cool watching the pros and the free riders and that, send it every time and ride stuff that's just unimaginable for me. But then it's also really cool, jumping onto a channel like yours and seeing, an everyday mountain biker, ride stuff that is, maybe not within the realm of stuff I'm riding right now, but it's not completely out of that realm either. It's, it's quite relatable. And I'm curious, do you think that's had any play into the success of your YouTube channel?
Uh, I don't know exactly why people find it interesting. I can kind of guess, but it is sort of surreal, where it's like it's weird to think about. But I know what I like to watch is what I really like is almost too like uh, almost, I don't want to say like the underdog story, but just someone's progression. And whether that's someone sort of at the top of their game pushing themselves to do their next thing, which is like at the very, very top. But I will watch people who are, say, maybe they're not at the same jumping level that I'm at, but like I'll watch like a video about them, like if they're like, oh, they're at the jump trail and they're like trying to progress themselves. And I do find it entertaining to see, you know, someone go through that process themselves and like hopefully, maybe they get it in the end and it's like, oh, it's really cool to see how they went about it. Even though like, sure, I could just go do it right now. Maybe, it's a blue jump line and sure, I could go jump it or whatever. I'm not necessarily watching them to see like the craziest jump, but what I find really entertaining is their process. And I think, yeah, I think maybe there's something there with the videos that my friends and I do where, I think a lot of people can ride what we're riding and do, especially like the Squamish Sea to Sky area is like, there's so many people who are like ride at a pro level who you've never heard of. They just do it for fun.
Yeah.
Like the level of riding here is insane. And so, yeah, tons of people can do it. But I think, I think we just try to, it's just us out having a fun ride. And that's what I like to watch. And apparently there's something entertaining about that.
Yeah, man, I certainly agree. And I think what you're saying there about, it's not sometimes all about, the final send or the final feature. Sometimes like the journey and the process behind that is the most interesting part. That kind of leads me into my next question. I've been watching your channel for a while, watching your videos for quite some time. I've seen you progress a lot. So I wanted to ask, like, how have you approached this progression on the bike? And do you have any tips for other people, wanting to get better and wanting to progress their riding?
Yeah, so one thing I noticed for myself, and I think maybe one thing that might be holding people back is you kind of always have to put yourself, um, you do have to push yourself into like a bit of discomfort so that your sort of normal gets pulled up along with it. And I notice it the most with jumping. Uh, so say if you're having like you're jumping and you've jumped a lot and but you don't seem to be like improving per se. And you're just kind of you've plateaued. One thing that's helped me is it's like, okay, I can jump this jump, not super well, but I make it across every time. Maybe you would try then to like learn how to tabletop or do like a no-hander or one-hander even, or do some sort of trick. So then as I was going off the jump doing these things and maybe focusing more on the tabletop and less on the jump, yeah, I was kind of like I was then becoming better at the jump. Like as I was pushing myself to do something else, like my brain somehow in the background was like learning to jump better. And now, now maybe I can jump the jump really well, and where I'm uncomfortable is doing the tabletop, and like, and then you got to kind of keep pushing past there. Is like, okay, well now I need to, do a better trick so that doing the tabletop is the part I'm really comfortable with. And so that's sort of the approach to improving that I've had is, something like that. And then it happens a lot of times. It happens without thinking. The biggest thing for me that helps is having a group of friends who are all better riders, and so they'll do something and I'll see them do it. And especially being there and seeing someone ride a feature where you're maybe nervous to do it, you just see them go about it. You're like, oh, you can go a lot slower, break here, and that gives you a lot of courage to try something. Or like you kind of notice their technique, where you can follow them behind the trail really helps, where you're again getting out of your own mind, like not being so active and thinking about like, am I braking here, am I jumping, am I pulling? You just sort of get into that flow state, and your mind seems to pick it up, in a different kind of way. And having better friends helps that. Like being around better riders seems to help that along a lot. And sometimes the last thing I'll do, and I'm being really uh, can't remember the word, but I'll write out specifically what I want to do. This is more obvious again with like BMX when I go ride. the skate park, I'll just write out like, okay, so I've done all this stuff, but I want to 360 like up this thing or like do a bar spin over this. And I'll make like a little checklist. And then I might focus on one of those things. And then again, like where I'm uncomfortable kind of just always shifts up a little bit. And then where I feel comfortable gets kind of dragged up along behind it. And yeah, that's more or less how I go about it.
Man, that's such an interesting approach. There's, on so many different levels, you're doing so many things there. But I love all of it. But I think being comfortable while you're uncomfortable is a great thing to get used to, like you're kind of saying there. And going back to when you're talking about, doing the same jump over and over again, and then maybe thinking about, adding a trick to that jump. I think that's really cool. And what got me is you're not just trying to do, the next bigger jump and a bigger jump and a bigger jump, but instead you're trying to do the same jump a little bit differently to challenge yourself in different ways. So I think that kind of goes back to what we're talking about at the start there, where it's like, how do we progress without putting the risk level up to a point where it's kind of out of control? And I think that's a really cool way, kind of, doing a jump that you're already, confident with, you already know you can do, but then trying to maybe add some more style or add a trick on top of it. I love that.
Yeah, I think there's, where people are getting hurt is they're probably making too big of a jump. And I even see it like, it reminds me, even when I'm teaching a student, like just teaching in general, the things that will frustrate a student the most, like when they're having a really hard time, is if they've made too big of a jump. If I get students in my class, especially so if they've transferred in from somewhere else or something where they've missed sort of this bit of the foundation of some topic, they make too big of a jump and now they're really confused because there's too many like background things that they just don't have the intuition for. And I think that happens in mountain biking as well, or riding in general, where some people might go to a too big of a jump, they make too big of a leap. The advice I gave for people to hit bigger jumps was people don't realize you're doing quite a few more things when you hit a bigger jump. And you're going to be going faster and you're going to be going higher and you're going to be in the air for longer. And there's a lot of different things that are going on there. And so one thing I said was, if you are going to approach a bigger jump, one thing you might want to do is find that small jump you're comfortable with. And then the one thing you're going to change is you're just going to do it faster. Like, get used to hitting the jump faster. So you're just going to change that one variable and make sure, okay, I am actually really comfortable going faster. And then, and then that way, when you progress to the next set of jumps that are even bigger, you're not changing like 5 things all at once about the way you're going to hit the jump. You're just, you've already practiced going faster. You've already practiced maybe trying to hop higher. And then that way, the only new thing is just maybe the jump itself. And yeah, that's something I try to tell people.
Yeah, dude, that's a great approach. I know, like, our brain hates the unknown. So if we're going into something like you say there, and there's 5 unknown aspects, we're probably going to have a bad time. But I love that approach of kind of trying to remove as many of those unknowns as possible, trying to get familiar with the speed, familiar with the feel, maybe visualize it first. And that way, when you go to hit it, it's not all totally new. It just feels maybe a little bit different to something we've done before. So you mentioned lots of different ways there. You're setting up and approaching progression. I'm sure this probably ties into my next question, but I'm curious, is there any like key principles you use for operating in an optimal state of mind for riding? I know you kind of mentioned getting into a flow state there. Is there anything you do to kind of get yourself into that state?
No, not as I haven't quite figured out like how to have like a good riding day. Like I can't seem to predict like if how scared I'm going to be going into new features. I do know things that'll make it worse. So when we're out riding, if I start to, if we eventually get to a point where we get to a feature and I'm kind of nervous, if I decide to then like walk that feature, it's like it's all downhill from there. Like it gets harder and harder to get back into the mindset of like being scared and doing something. There's something about, for me, as soon as I kind of like start to let it go, then more or less for the day, I'll be kind of like off, like way more nervous. And then that's how you get hurt too. I find when I'm writing a new feature, it's usually not like, oh, I went huge into the feature and crashed. It's like I went to go ride it, I got scared, I braked too much, like I went too slow, I tipped over, and that's how I got hurt, and that's how I fell. So then I also know in my head, like if I'm really shaky going into something, I need to know I can commit to it and not freak out at the last second. So then I'm thinking about getting injured and all that kind of stuff. Um, and yeah, I would say most of the time I'm like anxious about riding. And then yeah, the funny part about putting out videos, I think I show you know, my riding when I am nervous and walk stuff even in my videos. But people probably still have an impression that I'm more consistent than I am. I'm a very inconsistent rider. Like some days I'll be able just to turn down the fear and do things and feel pretty dialed. But yeah, but a lot of times I get really nervous, and once I get in my head, it can be pretty tricky to do something. So yeah, I actually have. So yeah, one day I'll figure out how to, consistently get that proper mindset of like calming down. But right now, I only know how to do the opposite. I know how to get scared. Yeah.
That's interesting, man. I think you're certainly not alone there. We all kind of experience on and off days, both on the bike and outside of biking as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally agree. Sometimes as we, start to let nerves seep in and take over, it can compound and then kind of take over for the rest of the day, which, isn't ideal for our ride-in. I'm curious though, if some days you feel kind of, nerves start to seep in, but you manage to snap yourself out of it and, carry on and have a good ride. Is there anything you're kind of telling yourself to snap out of it, or anything you're kind of doing to get back to that good state of mind?
Almost specifically that. Like we were in Squamish and we were riding a pretty tricky trail, and we got to a point where there was a feature that I'd ridden before, and I remembered it being kind of scary as I went down it, and I was really nervous to do it. And yeah, I just had to think like, okay, I kind of need to. I knew I could do it, and I knew I was just scared. So I knew it was all within like my skill level and everything like that. So I knew that was all fine. The biggest problem was I was just nervous, and I really just literally thought that I was like, okay, I need to try and do this so that I'm not more and more nervous and we can like continue the day, and I can, because I knew there was other things I wanted to try that I'd never done before. And yeah, just like consciously thinking about it, and just kind of being like, okay, I need to. It's funny, yeah, it's your own mind doing it to yourself, so it's kind of weird. But when you do, so I did end up doing this feature, and afterwards, yeah, it's almost like a weight is lifted off sort of your mind, and you're kind of like, okay, you broke through it, and so just actually literally thinking that, and then being safe, of course. I always make sure, like in this case, I knew I'd done it before. I was riding fine. I knew that the problem was I was just nervous. So yeah, I just made that decision of I don't want to be like more and more nervous as we keep going. So I need to just take my time, like slow down, do this feature, and then get over that. And then yeah, it seems to just go away sort of beyond your control. It just like a weight just kind of goes away, and you're like, okay, now we can continue on.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. I know someone described that kind of approach to me as like, you're feeling butterflies, you're feeling nerves. It's not necessarily a bad thing. We just need to get those butterflies in formation and
Mm-hmm.
and do what we know. So it sounds like you're taking a similar approach there.
Mm-hmm.
I know for me, when I'm kind of at the top of a feature and I'm having, a similar experience, I'm like, hey, I know I can ride this, but for some reason I'm feeling nervous. I try and just kind of focus on like, well, what do I actually need to do to ride this feature? Where am I going to brake? What's my body position going to look like, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps me kind of, fill my mind with, right, what am I going to do versus like what could go wrong and letting nerves kind of seep in and take over. Is that similar to what you're doing when you kind of block out those nerves?
Yeah, totally. I will visualize, like I'll make sure that I can see like myself going down, doing the feature. And I know yeah, I do think about actively like, oh, I'm going to break here and I'm going to do this at each spot, and then yeah, I'll make sure exactly like how you described that I think about it, yeah, like what it's going to be like to go down the feature. And then
Mm.
one thing I do if I know something scares me, and so this is kind of like, this might work for some, it works for me, but I don't know if I'd recommend it per se. But so there's one trail in Whistler called Dwayne Johnson, and you kind of come off like a kind of a big hill, and in the distance you can see the first really big jump, and it you can see it from really far back, and it looks really big. And I don't like that. Like, I don't like seeing like something way off in the distance that looks scary, because then I'm thinking too much like, am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Like, oh, it looks scary. What I'll do is I'll kind of just focus almost on my front tire, maybe just a little bit ahead of the trail, and just go, okay, I've done this jump before. I know how it feels and I know I can do it. I need the nerves to go away. So what I'll do is I won't even look at it. Like, I'll just focus on the immediate task of like, okay, the hill is coming up. Like, I just need to ride this way. And eventually I'll get to the jump, and it happens so fast where I don't have time to process the fear per se. And uh, I'll just, I'll hit the jump. And same sort of thing with, I'll do that when I'm like, that's part of the reason I like to follow people. Say if there's a new jump again that I know I can do, but I don't know the speed and I'm a little nervous about that, I'll follow them and I'll just focus on them in riding whatever is immediately in front of me. And then it all just can kind of flow together. Um, and yeah, that's sort of my other approach of, I know what makes me scared, so I kind of will not look at it, and that seems to work sometimes.
Man, that's a super interesting one. I've not heard like that exact approach before, so I'm super stoked you shared that. And it sounds to me a lot like, I've seen that jump. It's a giant jump, and I can understand, why that could make you feel a little bit nervous. I'm certainly the same. Rolling up towards that one in Whistler Bike Park there. And it sounds a lot like, we've got this goal, we've got this giant obstacle. And it's really nerve-wracking approaching that, but it sounds like you're kind of, focusing on the steps before that obstacle, focusing on the immediate task at hand, riding in, getting the speed right, making sure you're in a good body position before you do, the mega goal, which is the big jump at the end there.
Mm-hmm.
That's super
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. It's a, sometimes all of it together seems overwhelming, but then
Mm.
just each individual part, like, yeah. Again, when I look at a feature, it'll be like, well, this part's fine, and this part's fine, and this part's fine, you know. And maybe putting it all together seems really intimidating, but it's like, well, I can do this part, and then this part leads to that part, and that part's fine. Like, it's all fine in pieces. So sometimes you have to just take it that way and just go, I can do everything individually, and then putting it together, you know, hopefully that's not a problem.
Yeah, totally. I use that approach a lot on tech trails here as well. On first glance, sometimes looking down a trail, it's like, holy crap, this whole thing looks, horrible, scary, hard, whatever the word is.
Mm-hmm.
But if we actually kind of start dividing it up, what we've really got is, easy bits, hard bits, easy bits, hard bits. Moments to break, moments to roll, stuff like this. So instead of being, this giant chunk of work, we can divide it up and have a couple of breaks on the way down,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's only for, a microsecond, and help, chunk it up into manageable loads of work or manageable
Mm-hmm.
sections of trail.
Totally.
Yeah. Does your mental state or your mental approach, does it differ for, say, riding a big jump line at Whistler Bike Park versus, say, testing out a steep rock roll here on the North Shore?
Mm, not too much. It's a very similar feeling. I think for the most part, I'm more comfortable jumping because I've done it more. But yeah, no, I'd say my approach is pretty similar. Like, although I guess depending on if it's like really technical, um, and say maybe the feature is not like super big, uh, uh, per se, and it's not, you're not going to fall off a cliff or anything, but it just is like a super technical, lots of roots or rocks, and it's maybe really difficult to get down. Actually, might take the opposite approach of making sure that I'm planning my whole line and like I am looking at the whole feature and like planning the whole time. Like from way back, I'm like here. Um, so I guess Sometimes depending on the feature, it sort of depends on what is scary about it. It's like, is it scary because I'm nervous I'm not going to balance at like every point to make it all the way down, or is it scary because I need to like not fall off a cliff? uh,
Yeah, man.
so, but yeah, when it's technical, when it's like really technical, and there's like balance and stuff involved, I might actually take the opposite approach of what I said for jumps and look at the whole thing the whole time, and like and almost look ahead. Look ahead the whole time and just let your muscle memory like do its thing and don't get in its way, and just like look ahead down the trail to make sure that you're going the right way, and make sure you'll make it down.
Yeah, man, that's good advice. I often find that for myself as well, on the tech stuff. And for riders I'm coaching on, technical trails that are hard for them. Sometimes it's easy to get kind of caught up looking at the front wheel or looking at, the rocks and roots immediately in front of us. And that can cause us to kind of lose balance or lose track of, where we're going with the whole line. So looking a little further ahead and having that whole trail in mind is definitely a good bit of advice, I think. When it comes to, progressing and pushing yourself, I'm curious, do you have like goals that you're actively working towards on the bike?
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes there's things that I want to do. And uh those ones are maybe a more explicit. There's tricks that I want to do and trail features that I want to do. But I wouldn't say I'm overly focused on them. I just have a general desire to improve, and I'll kind of feel it out for if we go for a ride, and we go ride a trail, especially a new trail. We'll come upon features or whatever, and then it's always, I kind of know the general kind of feature that I can ride, like a general, if something, if it's a really technical feature, I can kind of look at it and be like, okay, this is well within my skills, this is on the edge. And that sort of general sense of a feature, I'm always trying to kind of shift that up a little bit more and be like, okay, I've done, and the more you ride, sort of you get this catalog of features that you've ridden in your mind of like, well, I've ridden like a rock roll into a chute before, and I knew, just now intuitively, I know to brake here, and then I know to left the brakes here. And the more different types of features you do, you sort of just, you build up this intuition more and more and more. And then you can start putting all those little pieces together. And then, so just in general, I'm trying to sort of ride more different features and sort of shift up my perception of what I can ride. Just that's sort of a vague sense of how I go about it.
No, man, I love that. And I love that idea of, cataloging features so that then you can come and compare them to new features you might be coming across there. And I was speaking with a fellow coach at work the other day, my buddy Matt, and he was, describing this same kind of technique in a different way, saying he kind of is trying to, mentally kind of take reference points of stuff he's done so that when he gets on a new trail and maybe, he's prone to nerves or there's other people talking about how hard it is, he can have a look at it objectively and say, no, compared to this thing I rode the other day, it requires a similar skill set. I can probably ride this.
So, that's totally it.
I love that approach, man. So that kind of leads into the next question. Like with these goals, how do you go about setting yourself goals that are achievable, yet still challenging and fun at the same time?
Well, for the explicit ones, they're things. So there's a couple things I want to do. Like there's tricks that I can do on my BMX that I want to do on the mountain bike. So those ones are a bit more obvious because I've done them on like a smaller bike in a skate park, and I want to do it like on the trail somewhere. So in that case, I'm just sort of changing sort of the bike and the spot that I'm doing it. So for that kind of progression, it's a bit more obvious that it's achievable. And I know it's hard just because I've never done it, at that spot or on this bike. With trail features, it gets like mountain biking in general, it gets a little bit trickier, especially a new feature on a new trail. it's funny. Sometimes you'll see something and it's so scary the first time you see it, and your intuition for how difficult it's going to be can sometimes be off. And a lot of times you might ride something and be like, "Oh, that was way easier than I thought it was." And then when you go back to that trail, you don't even think about it and you ride it. So what you think you can ride, you don't always exactly know, if that makes sense. But
Yeah, man.
yeah, it's hard to say. I will I'll go to a trail and I kind of just go like it just is all happening in the moment. That's why it's hard to like plan out. I think like the general mountain bike skills. I really just look to my friends, and then they'll bring me along to like new trails and stuff, and then we get this general. Yeah, you're always just trying to improve. Sort of like this feature seems a little harder. I'm going to need to learn how to brake better and like handle the hit better and like control my corner better and I guess yeah, just how cool the feature looks is probably part of it too. You're like, oh, that looked cool, like I feel like that was harder, and that's like we'll count that as progress.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And when you're kind of at that state where you're like, hey, look at this trail, like it's really cool, I want to ride this thing, but I need to, maybe work on my braking a little more first.
Hmm.
Are you kind of going back to a trail that's easier for you, actively working on your braking and then going back to that feature another day, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I'll do something maybe not as explicitly as that, like uh, going to something similar with a plan. I feel like I have done something like that before, but I might just when I'm out riding or doing stuff, maybe there's like a steep shoot that kind of scares me, and I just want my brake intuition to be a little better. So sometimes, like when I'm out riding with my dog, just running him around, I'll just find like a steep hill somewhere, and I'll be like, okay, this hill's pretty steep. Like, let's just see how like smashing the front brake feels as I go down this. Like, how much can I really brake down this sort of like steep thing? And I'll just kind of play around on the bike, doing kind of just dumb little stuff like that. Like, it's like when does the tire slide? Like, I'll just brake around, jump around, kind of jib around on the bike, and I will do stuff like that. And just that seems to help of just like general bike control skills, and then hopefully just sort of playing around, and then if I can see my friend do it, um, yeah, that seems to help for sort of approaching that next feature, and not being so again, it's like we said, just it's the unknown. Sometimes it feels like there's just too many things about it where you're like, I can't really see what I'm supposed to do. And the more that you can reduce that to being like, okay, well, I know I can brake, and I know I can stop here, or I know I can turn here, that helps a ton.
Yeah, man, totally. I love that approach. And, from a coach's perspective, it certainly makes sense. We kind of talk about it in the terms of like, minimizing the terrain. So go into an area that's maybe just a dog walking park or whatever with a bit of a hill,
Hmm.
and then maximizing the skill. So really working on your braking, really seeing how far you can push it. So that when you go back to an area that's maybe got maximized terrain, there's stuff going on everywhere, it's really
Hmm.
technical, you know that you've got the skills there to back it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Do you have a routine before you go riding and after you get back? And if so, can you talk a little bit on that?
Uh, not really. Yeah, before I go riding, I just make sure like I have my water bottle. Try not to forget anything.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Um, yeah, nothing really comes to mind. Just make sure I like to have my bike like pretty dialed. So I'll do that, but I won't do that like right before a ride. Like I'll just make sure my bike is kind of constantly like feeling really good.
Does that play into your confidence, like
Oh,
knowing that your equipment's solid?
100%. Like if
Yeah.
my bike is noisy for some reason, like that'll throw me off. Like that alone will throw me off. I'm very like yeah, if something is wonky with my bike, like something just is a little off, that really like plays with my head. And that it doesn't even have to be something is wrong with the bike, like just being extra noisy seems to do it. And no, so I really like to have my bike be the way that it's supposed to be, so that I know I can just like forget about it and my intuition will be totally fine.
Yeah. Man, that's great. And having a bike that makes absolutely no sounds. It's no small feat when you're riding a lot. It seems like every other day my bike's making a new sound and I'm back in the shop trying to fix it.
Yeah, no, they get loud.
Yeah, no, that's funny. What's been one of your biggest challenges on the bike?
Hmm. Uh, I would say just not being scared all the time is pretty tricky. I have friends who seem to they know where they can ride. Like they seem to have like their limit is like such a well defined line for them of like they know exactly where they can ride. Whereas mine is kind of quite blurry. It's like some days I'm like kind of a little bit slower, a little bit more cautious, and then other days I feel great and I seem to kind of jump around a lot. So for me, just that consistency of riding, I try to do, and maybe something I might do to help that is um, if there's a feature sort of right at that comfort level I've set for myself, I might make sure to ride it just to be like, just to get in the habit of not becoming more and more scared. And so, yeah, that's one thing. Probably the biggest thing for me is just like not being so nervous all the time. And then maybe maybe one day if I deal with that, then it'll be not getting hurt all the time. That'll be the flip side.
Man, I think it goes hand in hand. You know, you seem like a very analytical writer. You're kind of breaking things down. And I'm like that as well. And I think it's both like a blessing and a curse. You
Hmm.
know, a lot of the time it keeps us safe because we do have that high level of nerves and kind of cautiousness. But then other times it might hold us back or come back to bite us if we're kind of getting too nervous midway through a feature and unable to make it work.
Hmm.
So it's cool, you know, having that fear, you know, it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes that fear can be good. It can keep us safe on the bike. And I think it's just a matter of, like you're saying now, like learning to work with the fear and almost becoming friends with it versus having it as this, you know, constant enemy that's holding us back all the time.
Hmm.
Yeah. You've obviously, you know, ridden with lots of cool people. And I think, you know, with the YouTube channel, you've had the opportunity to ride with some pretty amazing riders. I'm curious if you've ever been given any really good advice. And if so, you know, what's the one bit of advice that kind of stuck with you from a mentor or from someone you've ridden with?
Hmm. Um, Probably nothing that anyone has said per se. There's I think riding with better riders, you just pick up on sort of the way that they go about things, and you kind of just you're in sort of their bubble of how their process, like their how they're going about riding a new feature or whatever it might be. And so they're giving advice, but not explicitly. You're kind of just experiencing it. So when you see, I've ridden with a bit with like Yoann and Remy and some of the other pros, and you just see it's nice. It's nice. Remy is quite an analytical rider, and so it is nice to see someone who's so good and has done such crazy things. To we might just go to a trail that I've ridden a lot, and at first he doesn't just do it. He'll go and he'll look and he'll be like, okay, I need to do this and this and this and this, and you might get the impression from these rampage style riders that they're just always going to just do it, no looking, whatever. But it is nice to see even at that level and even at that level and for a feature that's not like going to be anything for them, they're still taking the time to be safe, and so stuff like that. And yeah, advice I would say, um probably the best advice is always just from random people, random times for like bike setup, or uh I just remember, so I never really used my front brake when I first started riding. I just didn't use it that much because I was so used to like flipping over the bars with like BMX or old
Still
mountain
braking with
bikes.
your shoe on the back tire.
Yeah, um so just like that advice from just probably quite a few people always riding, just being like, oh yeah, use your front brake more here. Then on the flip side of that, when you like really get into your front brake, I remember watching a coaching video where um people were using their front brake in corners, and that's where they were falling all the time, is because their front was washing out. And I
Mm.
was like, oh, totally. And that was another big like, uh, it's almost like an epiphany moment of like, oh yeah, I am doing something like pretty dumb. I should stop doing
Yeah, man.
this.
No,
And
totally. I could relate there.
Yeah. So yeah, no like no one's ever sat me down and said anything. But I think just the way people go about things, you kind of pick up, um, and you just sort of you see, you're like, oh, I'd like to do that, and it's advice in sort of a a metaphysical way, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man, and that's almost more powerful sometimes, isn't it? Just seeing, the way these people go about their ride and the way they operate.
Hmm.
That, they're demonstrating their advice instead of just telling it to you, and sometimes that can be more powerful.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And then what you're saying there about, just the little tips we get from, all sorts of random people while we're out there riding. Sometimes the little things aren't necessarily little. I know kind of I was self-taught kind of growing up, just riding bikes around, flat paddocks in Australia as a teenager. And thought I knew how to bike, but it wasn't until I was kind of in my early 20s that I finally got a mountain biking lesson over in New Zealand. And there was just so many little things like that that it just kind of blew my mind, like light bulb moments. But I was like, wow, I can't believe I didn't know that, but it makes everything else so much easier.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because you do like one thing that happens when you're by yourself, just with everything, is you don't know what you don't know, and then someone just like turns the light bulb on, and you're like, oh,
Yeah,
geez, this is like, you know, that new thing is actually amazing, and I just never even knew about it.
exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Super cool to think back, eh? What has riding taught you? Obviously, you've learned a lot about riding in the recent years, but what has riding taught you maybe about life outside of riding?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a bit of a tricky one.
Yeah, a bit of a deep one.
Yeah, that's deep. It yeah taught me. I feel like it's given me an intuition about learning in general and how people learn, and like how much overlap there just is with um like just some of the ways that we go about learning stuff on the bike, and some of the ways that I go about teaching students in a classroom. Like just that progression of like how you're going about it and being analytical about it and being explicit about it.
Hmm.
It's like it's exactly the same. Like it's um you might have to like sit down and write down like, okay, I need to learn this topic. Like, what is it about it that I don't know? Like, you might need to actually sit down and be like, what is it that's, what don't I know here? And like, or what do I need to learn? Like, what's the end point? And then what do I need to do that? And where am I now? And then same with riding, you might do the same thing. It's like, I want to ride this feature. I'm not good at braking, so I need to practice braking. And you might need to actually sit down and think about it. And so I feel like I've kind of adopted those. Yeah, we're made to be just realized that like how we go about it. There's like a lot of overlap just between progression and learning, just no matter what you're doing. And yeah, the more you do it, just like the more features you ride, you build up like a catalog. The more people you ride with and how you see them go about learning, say riding a feature, you go like, oh, I saw this person take this approach, and then you kind of catalog that into like giving advice to the next person of like, you want to have 10 different ways that someone learned something, and maybe your way that was fine for you, but someone else might have done something a little different, and then that way when you're teaching someone you can go like, okay, well, let's try this or this. If that doesn't work, we'll try this. And I see that in biking, and then I do the same thing sort of if I'm teaching in the classroom.
Absolutely, man. That's really cool, kind of hearing your perspective coming from, teaching in a classroom and then applying that to biking and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love if you can tell us a little bit about what you're actually studying and what you're actually teaching, because I hear that kind of ties in quite well to what we're talking about here. Like you're working with the mind in some kind of way. Is that right?
Yeah, so big picture, my lab is um is focused on functional brain imaging. So you can get an MRI, and that'll show you like a photo of the brain, like a literal structure of the brain. But there's a lot of problems that have nothing to do with the way your brain is shaped. It has to do with how it's working. And so there's things like seizures. A lot of times you can't really tell. Like if you get an MRI And if you have epilepsy, it might just look normal. It'll just look like a normal brain, but it's actually the connections that are mismatched. And you can't see that on an MRI. So what we'll do is we'll do functional brain imaging. And what that does is shows us the function. In someone who's epileptic, we can see like, oh, this part of the brain is going nuts, and specifically right here, and we can show them that, um, and then we can also study things like, say, if you write with your right hand, what side of your brain lights up, and then you write with your left hand. We see how the brain lights up that way, and then how the brain is sort of trying to teach itself to do different tasks. So things that are things that you would never see on an MRI. The brain always just looks the same, but we're actually just looking at how the function goes. And so that's sort of the big picture. My advisor is head of the MEG department at Surrey Memorial Hospital here, and MEG stands for magnetoencephalography. And so probably a lot of people have heard of EEG, which is electroencephalography. You'll get that sometimes, again, for epilepsy, or maybe you got a concussion or whatever it might be, and they stick the electrodes on your head and they'll look at your brain activity that way. And so what that looks at is the electrical, sort of your brain activity makes little voltages and it makes its way to the skin, and then we see that. And that works pretty well, and the machines are relatively cheap, but there's another way to do it by picking up the magnetic fields, and we do that with sort of a big helmet and a bunch of sort of sensors that are like antennas, and we can actually pick up the magnetic fields, and we could do it with a lot higher resolution, both in time, so we can see things happen faster, and in space we can see down to like sub-millimeter. And because we're looking at the magnetic fields and there's nothing touching, it doesn't sort of blur as it goes outside the head, and we get that better resolution. So that's the big picture. And so the that's machines
I was going to say, super interesting field you're in, and I could see the passion there. That's awesome. I love it.
So that's the big picture. And right now the way the machines work is the sensors themselves are stuck in liquid helium, and it's a big machine. They need to be super cooled. They have to be in a special room. They have to be in the basement. It's all wildly expensive, and it can't move. It's a very big machine. And the helmet is one size fits all. So kids and babies and stuff, it's quite difficult to put their head up in there, because as you get further away from the head, there's such small signals already. They basically go away. So one thing that people are working on is a different type of sensor called an OPM. And basically what we can do is we can heat up some metal in a glass tube, and we shine lasers at it. And by shining the laser on it, all the little gas metals act like little magnets. And what will happen is if we bring another magnet, like your brain activity in your head, close to this heated up laser shined glass tube, it'll affect the way the laser goes through it, and we can infer the magnetic fields. And so this new kind of hardware, this OPM hardware, which stands for optically pumped magnetometer, that's what I work on. So I'm trying to build, just sort of add just one more little step to this new hardware where we're shining lasers on stuff, and just trying to make it work a little bit better, so that one day maybe that's the technology we use, and then we can use it. It'll just make hospital technology more accessible and better. We can treat more functional brain issues, things like concussions, epilepsy. We help people with autism. Basically anything that goes on in the brain functionally, we're going to be able to help out with that more and more. So that's without going into, there's a whole rabbit hole we could always go down, but more or less I work on the hardware of that, and it keeps me busy.
I'm sure. Thank you for sharing. It's so cool to hear. I'd read just a little bit, kind of, I think it was on Trailforks or somewhere when I was coming up with my questions for this interview, but it's so cool to hear in depth, what you're actually doing outside of the world of mountain biking. And, it sounds like some, really important research and really great work you're doing there. And I'm sure it kind of ties in a lot as well. Obviously a lot of people in our sports unfortunately, do experience some kind of brain injuries from time to time. So it's great to hear there's people like you out there working on the technology behind treating that and hopefully, helping them have a better time in their recovery as well.
Yeah, so right now there's no, if you get a concussion, we don't have a very good way to tell you like you have a concussion or sort of the severity of it. There's not like a brain health metric that we can really look at, even though there's some physical issue happening in the brain. We just haven't figured it out quite yet. And what a lot of people are working on, sort of adjacent to this as well, is just like you have heart rate, blood pressure, your heart rate variability, all those heart metrics, maybe your breathing and stuff like that. We've got all these other health metrics for other parts of your body, and we want to make brain metrics as well. And so hopefully in the next, maybe not too far along, we're going to have brain health metrics as well. Then we can see like how you're feeling. Maybe we'll have like real metrics for how depressed someone is feeling, like, and you'll know then more explicitly that it's not in your head, it's a real physical thing, and we'll be able to tell you like, oh yeah, you got, score 30 on the depression scale, so we need to do something about that. Just like we do with the heart, where it's like, oh, your blood pressure is too high, we need to do something about that. So we're working. Well, not me, but someone's working on that.
It's great to hear, dude. Certainly an interesting field, both for, the people in there working on it, and then for the people that also need these services as well. It's great. I'm sure we all do from time to time. Kind of going back to the writing a little bit here, I've got a question I wanted to ask you. Obviously, you try your best not to crash, you try your best not to have any setbacks on the bike. If you ever do, though, if you have a slip over, a bad day on the bike, maybe it is a crash, do you have any tips to help kind of minimize this turning into, like a bigger thing, like a mental block or any kind of ongoing doubt or hesitation in your mind after that crash or that setback?
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. Like if you fall on a feature, it's really hard to get up and do it again. Um, I will. I don't really have a plan uh, that's written out or anything like that. But what I'll do is, I think I'll take it easy at first and not try to rush anything, because sometimes going right back and like trying to do it again too quick, you're too nervous, and you'll just fall again in a different way. So I might just take some time just to think about it, and then I'll think about like what went wrong, like whether it was like, was it my fault, or was something loose on the feature? Like, did I go to ride it and like a rock came out of the ground? Was it my riding, or was it like the feature itself? So I need to figure that out, and then I will. I'll sort of just give it enough time to like naturally progress. Eventually, the fear kind of like starts to get a little bit less and lower, and then I'll go back to it, and I'll make sure I'll ride it on sort of. I might try to go back and ride it on like an ideal conditions day. Like I'll go back to riding it in the easiest way possible, and sometimes that means there might be like a beeline. I might try that. Like I'll go on a dry day when everything's good, and maybe there's a beeline that does kind of half the thing. So I'll kind of do that, and then I might walk back up, and then just sort of feel it out step by step again. And I might just go about the same way that I did the feature the first time. Like if the first time I, did all these steps that eventually got me there, I might just have to repeat it. But luckily it'll be usually faster because I know how everything's going to go. And then that seems to help. And yeah, eventually I get back and I do it and things get back to normal, more or less.
Hey, that's some great advice there. And it's a great process. It's funny, kind of at the start there, you're like, oh, I'm not really sure, but it sounds like as we dig into that more, like you've got a great process there for
Mm.
dealing with times like that. So that's awesome. Looking ahead to the future, have you got any cool projects or rides coming up that you'd like to mention, or anything you can share with us now?
So I'm hoping. So I submitted something for a conference in the UK, which would be in late August. So if that gets accepted, then I'm going to go to Europe for a while. So I'd go there like late August and stay there probably for a few weeks and tour around
Uh-huh.
Europe.
And
Bring my
is that
bike.
related to your studies or related to biking?
Yeah. So it'd be I submitted something for a presentation, um, and so yeah, if that happens, that'll be really cool because then that'll be something like pretty crazy to go over to Europe and ride and film. Um, got a lot of trips to Whistler planned, and then up to Pemberton and sort of the Sea to Sky area. Um, just a few videos to film there. Um, and then other than that, not too much. We kind of like our riding group, like are very like okay, like this weekend, let's go to like X, and we'll just kind of go do it. And so we're kind of just making it up as we go. Um, so besides that, yeah, nothing too big planned. I'd like to get down to like Sedona and sort of like those big mountain bike areas, but that so I'm going to go to the next Sedona Mountain Bike Festival for sure, because I've missed them the last 2 years,
Yeah,
and
certainly look like a good time, man.
I know. So I'd really like to go do that. Um, and then yeah, pretty much just the bike parks. I'd like to get back to some of the interior bike parks, and I know they have lots of good stuff there, and I haven't really had a chance to get out and ride them.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome.
yeah,
I'm certainly pumped to see Van Can goes, across border and then over to Europe as well. That would be
yeah.
rad. Awesome. On that same note, I wanted to ask, do you have any brand partners or sponsors that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, so I've been with Noble Wheels for a couple of years now, and they've been
Nice.
really great. They yeah, they really get sort of like the YouTube thing, and that helps a lot. Yeah, one thing that's tricky, just the YouTube, all the YouTube stuff has helped a lot for just sort of business training in general. Just how do you communicate value and how do you communicate what you're doing? And what I've learned, and I've seen other people say this, but you kind of maybe have to just do it yourself, is sometimes people just don't sort of get what you're doing, and if you have to try really hard to convince them, usually it just is like even if you do convince them, they were never really sold in the first place, and just is a worse deal for everyone. Like no one's really into it. Um, Whereas, and so tying that back to Noble is like they have always been like they've been really on the ball with like kind of mountain biking in general. And uh, oh, there's a guy coming in to to blow my own patio. Oh.
Oh, good man.
Yeah, but so they've really like known sort of like this whole YouTube space and social media, and like they seem to have like really kept on the ball with all the modern trends and everything. So they've been a really great partner. They always want to do like interesting stuff, and they seem to be like whatever they're really broad as well. They got got a really good like they got really good riders who are doing like the professional thing, and then they've got like cool media coming out, and then they've got sort of me on the casual media, and then but they're also doing like really high end stuff, and so yeah, they've been great. And then Noli has also joined the channel this year. They're actually just down the street from where I live, and they I got to meet Noel and everyone there, Ken and Brenda, and yeah, they've been all really great. The YouTube thing is new to them, but again, the one like when I feel like when I sort of started talking to them, they really like they got it, and then they were like, oh, like yeah, this makes sense. And I always really liked Noli's. I liked sort of their philosophy, and Noel is he uh I can't remember. He's their engineer, but he did his undergrad in physics, so he has a very like functional approach to design, and like that really speaks to me. We talked about engineering and stuff a lot when we met, and yeah, just that kind of philosophy I was really interested in, and I really like the brand and like how they were approaching sort of mountain biking in that way, and like doing stuff because it works, and not following too many trends, and yeah, so they've been really great. and they same sort of thing. They've been like they want to like do cool stuff and do cool projects. And I've also been an ambassador for Kinetic Cycles, a local shop, and I met them and I actually made a video about it a couple of years ago now. Where when I first started mountain biking, I like with BMX, I did everything myself always because it was pretty straightforward. But especially when I first started, there was lots of stuff about the mountain bike I didn't really know how to fix. Like I didn't really have any tools to bleed the brakes or like work on suspension or like do cables or anything like that. And I lived in a small house, and so I always had to go to shops. And I'd gone to quite a few shops and always had like really weird experiences where like you go in and then you come out and you somehow feel worse and you're like, this is weird. like the staff are like sassy and like, yeah, it just is like a weird like vibe of like you're interrupting them. And I at one point I had my wheel apart and I didn't have a cone wrench, and I just needed like to turn the cone nuts to tighten up the wheel. And so I went to the one shop and I tried to buy it, and they're like, oh, we don't have any cone wrenches, they're all sold out. And I was like, okay, well, order me one. And I was like, oh, can we tighten this up? Like literally, I think like a half a turn, like it just needed to be like snugged up that last little bit. And I had it all apart, like it just the most minimal, like 10 seconds of work. And I just remember the guy like kind of went and he looked at like his list of charges and he's like, okay, like a hub adjust is $35. And I was like, $35? Like, can I just do it? And they're like, no, we don't lend tools. And I was like, but you're just turning this one nut right here. And they were really adamant about charging me this like $35. And so I just left because I was annoyed. And I went to Kinetic and I just explained to them my problem about how I was looking for a cone wrench. And they were like, oh, do you want to borrow one? And I was like, oh, yes. And ever since then, I was totally sold there. I started like shopping there all the time because it was exactly how my shop that I worked at was always like. It was like friendly, like there's no reason to be in a bad mood. Like everyone is like in a good mood and stoked on bikes. And so eventually, about a year later, he contacted me and asked me to be an ambassador for the shop. And yeah, they've been really great. And it's nice to have a shop like sort of exactly how you would imagine like just a fun bike shop would be. And yeah, so yeah, it's been good. And they've been, yeah, it's nice to have people who are stoked on the channel, and they all help a lot. And so couldn't really do too much without them.
Man, that's super cool. It sounds like you've got some really solid partners there, and I love hearing the story behind that one as well. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure a lot of people can relate. And love the idea that you've got a couple of local brand partners as well there, supporting your channel, and you're out there, testing their bikes and testing their service on the local trails here. That's right.
Yeah.
I'm going to be respectful of your time here and, start winding things down in just a second. But we did get a couple of good questions from our followers out there on Instagram. So I'd love to throw them into the mix here. Hopefully they won't be too much of a curveball for you. But the first one I've got here is from a guy called Jackson. And he's asked, what are your strategies for keeping up with Dale Stone going uphill?
E-bike, mostly.
Good one.
Yeah, I don't think people appreciate how fast Dale can climb. He is he like his it's not an exaggeration that like if I look at my PR and his PR on like a long climb section especially, yeah, he just goes twice as fast. I think we put out like a similar amount of power, but I weigh like twice as much as him. And you know, yeah, there just is no he has to tone it down to ride with us normals. And and yeah, it I don't think there is much I've got a trainer and like a Zwift and stuff like that, and I try to ride and climb a lot, but yeah, no, that's a tough one. I don't know if there is ever going to be a way to catch up.
No, good answer, man. Good answer. Another one here is from a lady called Janice, and she's asked you, Nick, you've just pulled off the greatest jump or maneuver of your career, but it wasn't captured on the camera. Did it even happen?
There is a saying that says film or fiction, and yeah, that's a hard one. It would be. I definitely have done stuff that I haven't filmed that would have been nice to have filmed. Um, but there is something nice going out and just like riding with your friends and doing stuff. But oh yeah, it is funny when someone tells you that they had done something like pretty crazy. And it's like, oh, did you film it or anything? And they're like, no, and you're like, oh. It's not that you don't believe them necessarily, but you like want to see it. Like, yeah,
Yeah, man.
yeah. I'll say, yeah. I don't give people too hard a time, but I always do like to have like I like to see people do stuff. So part of me always wishes that everyone always filmed their cool stuff.
Yeah, dude, I think it just goes back to that point we were talking about earlier about, seeing people do cool stuff is inspiring.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
So it's awesome if they filmed it. No big deal if they didn't, but if they did, rad. Cool. Another question here from Jen. She's asked, how many times do you repeat the same track to get the perfect footage?
So yeah, I don't. Except, well, the only exception to that might be like, say, like I posted a video of Coastal Cruise, and I might, and that, like for Instagram, I might try to ride that trail quite a few times just because like, oh, I want to get the table at this spot like really good and hit the jump here really good. And so I might do something like that where I repeat it over and over again just to get like the Instagram clip. But Instagram is more like a superficial platform in that it just is specifically about like the trail or the riding. It just is about looking aesthetically pleasing or kind of cool. And so in those cases, I'll try to like redo something if I think I can do it better. But for videos, I take a different approach of the video is usually kind of like the story of us riding. And so whatever happens, happens. And yeah, we won't necessarily like go back and rewrite the trail just to get like a better shot through the trail, unless that's what we're trying to do for the video of like, maybe like the best run we did through this trail. We do that sometimes, but 90% of the time we're just sort of going about our usual ride, and then the story just sort of unfolds. So not very often. Yeah.
Yeah, man, that's a cool answer. And I think, I love your approach there of like, sometimes an imperfect run is the perfect footage.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps it real and it's awesome seeing, how things actually went versus just seeing, like that highlight reel all the time. So that's sweet. Going deep here for my last question. Where do you see yourself in 10 years' time?
Hopefully I graduate. um, it would be really nice. I would love to like do the van life thing, at least like for maybe a year or two at some point. And I think after I graduate, we'll have sort of a transitionary period where maybe that could happen. That's a little bit sooner than 10 years, but that
Awesome.
would be something like maybe in the like 5-year range, um, doing something like that.
So van life.
Yeah. In 10,
Love
it's
it.
so hard to predict like what will happen in 10 years, because even 10 years ago from now, I was in like I was in a different degree than I got when I was an undergrad, and I lived in Winnipeg, and I didn't mountain bike at the time. Like so much has changed that are like is so unpredictable. It yeah, I think anything I say for like where I really guess that I'd be, I think I'll probably be pretty wrong, because yeah, stuff comes up, and I find yeah, you just kind of random stuff comes up, and then we like to kind of take opportunities as they come, and something always sort of happens, and then you go down some wacky path, and you end up somewhere totally unexpected, and that's always a little more fun.
Absolutely, dude. Super cool, isn't it? Looking back and thinking about like how much has happened in the last 10 years
Hmm.
and then how much is going to happen for you in the next 10 years. That's right.
Hmm.
What's the biggest takeaway you hope listeners learn from this conversation?
um, ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think one thing for me, maybe, yeah. I think for when I've met people or met riders, maybe but there's probably not too many crazy things they'll take away, but maybe one like smaller thing is even though I do show my riding, even when I like I'll show me walk around stuff every now and then and whatnot. Um, but the way that I actually ride is probably even more reserved. Like I probably ride slower and like less aggressively than on video. And so like I said, when I, had gone out to ride with Remy, like sure you see his rampage stuff, but he's not like riding at 100% all the time. And so sort of that the reality of like how people actually ride is maybe something that someone might learn. Because I actually get both. I get people who think that I'm quite a bit better than I actually am. And I bet you lots of people who ride with me are kind of like, oh, I was kind of expecting you to like ride a lot harder and faster. And then on the flip side of that too, sometimes people are surprised that I'm a little better because maybe they watched my older videos or, and yeah. So it is funny. I do get both, but it turns out I think I guess the biggest takeaway maybe someone might take is like what you see online. I mean, this is true in general as well. Like you see someone's Instagram online, that is just such a small portion of like who they are and what they do. And on Instagram, I try to put out like a lot of my better riding, but I don't really ride like that all the time. And the same with even just riding. The amount of riding I do. I think people got the impression that I ride like all day, every day, but it just kind of seems that way because I might post like clips from the same day spread out through the week, and they're like, "Oh, he's riding again." It's like, no, just that was all one day.
Yeah, dude. No, thank you for being so open and sharing that. I think it's, a really good point for everyone to consider, everyone that's out there riding and consuming mountain biking content online. It's just an important thing to keep in mind, so that's great. We've talked lots, in this conversation about, what you're doing online, and how you're capturing your mountain biking. For those that don't know, for those that don't already follow you, where can they find you and follow along with your adventures online?
So YouTube, of course, from the channel VanCan. My Instagram is VanCan MTB, and I do a bit on TikTok, but it's mostly just the same clips from Instagram. And then the same thing. I do have a Facebook page, but I always forget to like even click the like share to Instagram and Facebook. So it is actually the same stuff from Instagram. So yeah, mostly Instagram and YouTube, and those are my two main places.
Fantastic, dude. And for those listening, I'll put links to Nick's Instagram and YouTube pages in the show notes here. Dude, thank you so much. This has been an awesome conversation. I feel like we've gone, in so many different directions with it. I've certainly learned a lot about biking, about, YouTubing, making content, and about your studies there as well. It's been super cool. So thank you a lot for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, it was awesome.
No worries at all, dude. Have an awesome summer. I look forward to seeing, what you get up to this summer and hopefully see you out on the trails at some point.
Sounds good.
Right on, dude. Have a good one.
See ya.